Hello everybody and welcome to another breakdown video. In this video we will be taking a deep dive into all of the main card fights taking place this weekend at UFC 257. We'll be looking at all these fights from a gambling perspective, and hopefully you'll be able to use the information in this video to make better betting decisions. Now, the last couple of weeks have been absolutely insane. Uncle Dana has blessed us with 3 amazing events in 7 days. The Wednesday night card between Chiesa and Magny was absolutely huge. We had 14 fights on it. So I'm a bit behind with my fight research at the moment with all the work we've had to do lately. But that means that I have still got a ton of fights to research for UFC 257. So if you'd like to research these fights with me, all you've got to do is head over to my Twitch channel. It's twitch.tv/Diary of a Pro Gambler. And I will leave a link to that in the description below. It's completely free. Go follow me. If you follow me, you'll get a notification whenever I go live, and you can hang out, watch the fights with me. We'll go through all the matchups I haven't covered yet in great depth and hopefully dig up some decent bets. If you haven't got time for that and you'd still like to get my opinion on some of the fights taking place this weekend that I won't cover in this video, all you've got to do is head over to my website, MMABettingTips.com. Every time I finish a live stream, I record a short 10-minute video summarizing my findings on that fight, which I post on my website, so you can find information on all the prelim matchups on there. On top of that, I also upload the video of the live stream to my website. So if you don't have time to catch the live stream and you just want to catch like a 10-minute snapshot of all the key points in a matchup, head over to my website. There's also a bunch of other stuff on there, VIP chat room, the lab. Check it out. But anyway, boys, let's get into some fights. The first fight we're going to be talking about in this video is going to be Amanda Ribas versus Marina Rodriguez. So Amanda Ribas hasn't been in the UFC for very long. She's only 27 years old. I think this is going to be her 5th fight in the UFC. And yet, even after a very, very short space of time, she's already one of the biggest favourites on this card against a very, very skilled opponent in Marina Rodriguez. So we can see Ribas is currently around odds of 1.33, which is minus 303, for an implied probability of 75%. If we take a look at the odds on Rodriguez, she's currently around about an average of 3.50, which is plus 250 for an implied probability of 29%. So whenever I see a fighter in this odds range, the odds range we see Ribas in, floating around 1.33, you've really got to be in a situation where you've got no way to lose in order to command odds like this. So when I research a fight like this and I'm taking a look at, Amanda Ribas' strengths and weaknesses, I'm trying to identify, are there any areas where Rodriguez can cause her a problem? And if the answer is yes, in this odds range, I am just not interested in betting her. You remember a couple of weeks ago where we put out the breakdown video for the Cater Holloway event, and we had guys like Santiago Ponzinibbio and Jacqueline Buckley in this similar odds range, and I was saying, look, from a stylistic point of view, these are good matchups for Buckley and also Ponzinibbio. However, there are things that both guys do, or there are risk factors with both those fights where I could definitely see Buckley and Ponzinibbio losing, and for that reason, it just isn't worth betting them at such steep odds because the risk to reward ratio is very poor. With Buckley, we were talking about him being a little bit one-dimensional and having bad striking defense, and of course, the Chirico was able to exploit that by knocking him out with a beautiful head kick. And with Ponzinibbio, we were saying he's had a lot of health issues since he last fought. Who knows what version of him we're going to get? I don't know if that played a part in Jing Liang being able to knock him out, but point is, whenever you see a person in this odds range, you've got to go, even if you went 4-1 on bets like this, which would be very, very difficult because you'd have to hit an 80% win rate to go 4-1. You'd still only be breaking even. So you really need to feel super confident in fighters in this odds range, because placing bets on fighters in this odds range can get you into a hell of a lot of trouble. But Amanda Ribas is brilliant, make no mistake. You're not going to hear me saying Marina Rodriguez is likely to beat her, because that's not the case. But when I did go and research this fight, I was a little bit disappointed by Amanda Ribas' striking. For whatever reason, I thought her stand-up was better than it actually is. And when you go back and watch some of her past fights, you can see, past opponents like Mackenzie Dern, Randa Marcos, they have been able to land on her standing, which isn't great because, Marina Rodriguez's striking is levels and levels and levels above Dern's and Randa Marcos. So that's a little bit of a red flag for me, because I was thinking, maybe these girls are around about even, when it comes to striking. Maybe Ribas is a little bit better striking, but if they're around about, equal when it comes to striking, we know Ribas is going to have a huge advantage on the ground. Therefore, maybe she's worth a shot, throwing her into some parlays or going big on her on a straight bet. But I was really, really disappointed by her striking, to the point where I think if this does stay standing, Rodriguez is going to do terrible things to her. Rodriguez is brilliant in the clinch, very aggressive stand-up, throws a really diverse range of strikes, and I think Ribas is going to be in quite a lot of trouble and struggle quite bad when this fight's in kickboxing range. But obviously we know Marina Rodriguez's biggest weakness in her past fights has been her takedown defense and ground game. Rodriguez is one of these fighters, a little bit like Jermaine Durandame, maybe it's something with female fighters with a base in Muay Thai, but Marina Rodriguez is one of these fighters that shows flashes of really good takedown defense, in the sense that, quite often when girls shoot in on her, she does a really good job of, clearing her legs and using overhooks, to make it very difficult for her opponent to take her down. But unfortunately, Rodriguez gets very complacent and makes really rookie mistakes when trying to defend takedowns that almost always result in her ending up on her back. She'll do things like, throw strikes instead of fighting for underhooks when her opponent's trying to get in on her legs. Or she will do things like, get very complacent in the clinch, and instead of trying to clear her legs out of danger when her opponents try and tie her legs up and turn them into trip takedowns, she'll be more interested in, throwing knees or something like that. So Rodriguez's takedown defense is extremely poor. Now, if you watch my videos, you will have heard me say in the past, it's not a deal breaker if someone's got bad takedown defense, as long as they're pretty good at working their way back up to their feet. Unfortunately, Marina Rodriguez isn't. She's very, very weak off her back. If you take her down, very, very easy to hold her down. It's very, very easy to advance position on her, and it's very, very easy to just do whatever you want to her on the ground. She doesn't really know how to work her way back up to her feet, and doesn't seem to be improving either. Her ground game in her last fight against Carla Esparza was extremely bad, and that is bad news when you're going up against someone like Amanda Ribas that has an extremely high level ground game. Ribas is a nightmare on the ground, and if this fight goes to the ground, it should be utter domination. So really, when we're looking at this fight, we're looking at it and we're going, okay, we know Ribas has got a huge advantage on the ground. What's the probability that Ribas can get the fight to the ground where she can use those big advantages? Well, she's got a great chance of getting this fight to the ground, because even though she doesn't shoot many takedowns, when she does, she's got the element of surprise on her side, because she can she can cover distance very quickly, and because her striking's reasonably good, she can use that striking to set up her takedowns. She's not just one of these grapplers that's going to come out and spam takedowns that Rodriguez is going to be able to see coming from a mile away. Rodriguez has got to respect Ribas' striking, and that will enable Ribas to find opportunities to take Rodriguez down. Now, the one problem with Ribas' style of, I'm not going to call it wrestling, but one of the problems with Ribas' method for getting the fight to the ground is that it tends to be judo throws and body lock trip downs in the clinch. Now, Ribas is very good with both those techniques, but because Marina Rodriguez comes from a Muay Thai background, she's very, very strong in the clinch. So Ribas may not find it as easy to hit takedowns as she usually would, although Rodriguez's takedown defense is so bad, there's a very good chance Ribas can get this fight to the ground, so long as she really commits hard to the takedown. So it's a good stylistic matchup for Ribas, because there's no doubt she is levels and levels and levels and levels above Rodriguez on the ground. The only risk factor that I can really see here is when we look back at who Ribas is for, Emily Whitmire, Mackenzie Dern, Randa Marcos, and Paige Van Zandt. Realistically, 3 of these 4 girls can barely even throw a punch. So Ribas has never really faced any resistance striking. She's never fought anyone that can really hurt her standing up. And Marina Rodriguez has one element to her skill set, which is both a strength and a weakness. That element is that she's exceptionally aggressive. She goes right after her opponent, just looking to kill them, basically. Throws a really high volume of strikes, looks to take them out and inflict big damage with every single thing that she throws. Sorry, boys, got an itchy nose. She looks to take her opponents out and hurt them bad with everything that she throws. So that's a strength, because Ribas has not dealt with that. We don't know how Ribas is going to react if she gets a broken nose, or if she gets wobbled or a bell rung and, has to kind of back up and regroup. Ribas might be one of these girls that panics when she gets hurt, and Rodriguez is definitely going to bring the fight to her. That's one risk factor, and quite a major risk factor, because we know Rodriguez is going to bring a stand in, and we know that Ribas hasn't really faced anyone that is going to bring it like Rodriguez will. That strength for Rodriguez, in that she's exceptionally aggressive, is also a weakness, because she doesn't pay any attention to what her opponent is doing. So what you'll quite often see is Rodriguez will come forward super aggressive, looking to inflict big damage with big knees in a clinch, long straight punches, but her opponents can quite often use that forward momentum against her to shoot a takedown and take her down, because she's always just coming forward looking to strike, and she's not thinking about defending the takedown. So that's one area where Ribas can kind of use that advantage against her. So look, at the end of the day, it's a good stylistic matchup for Ribas. I'm a little bit disappointed that her striking is not as good as I remember it being, and that's one area where Rodriguez is going to have a clear advantage. But ultimately, Ribas has got the grappling to dictate where the matchup takes place. The grappling should be the difference. Ribas should win this. It's just, I'm not going to bet on a fighter as such a big favourite when I haven't really seen him tested or put in any bad positions. I hope that makes sense. Let's now get on to the next fight between Matt Frevola and Otman Azaitar. So if we take a look at the current odds on this one. So Azaitar currently floating around odds of 1.63, which is minus 159 for an implied probability of 61%. And if we take a look at the odds on Matt Steamroller Frevola, that's a bit of a tongue twister. He's currently around about average odds of 2.30, which is going to be plus 130 for an implied probability of, what was it? 43%. Okay. So, there's a little bit to unpack on this one, but straight from the offset, this is a very bad fight for betting. It's a bad fight for betting because there's big unanswered questions over Otman Azaitar. If we take a look at his record, he's got an impressive 13-0 record, but he hasn't been that active since 2017. We've barely seen him in the last 3 years. There's less than 5 minutes of footage on this guy over the last 3 years, so we don't really know what we're getting from him. What I can tell you is that he didn't look great back in 2017 when we saw him go into the third round against Alejandro Martinez. I'll have a little bit of that in the background for us in just a little while. But what I would say about Azaitar is when you watch his last two fights in the UFC against Calderwood and Teemu Packalén, he moves a hell of a lot better than he moved back in 2017. So what that tells me is this guy has improved a lot in the last 3 years. The problem is, because he hasn't spent much time in the octagon, we don't actually know how much he's improved in the last 3 years. What I can tell you is that his striking is exponentially better in 2020 than it was in 2017. One of Azaitar's big weaknesses back in 2017 was his takedown offense and ground game. I'll show you some clips in a minute, but his takedown offense and ground game was very, very bad. What I would say is, how is takedown defense and ground game going to match up against Frevola? It's going to be very difficult to say because we haven't seen any of his grappling in the last 3 years. But if his grappling has improved at the same rate I believe his striking has, because we have seen some of his striking, he's likely to be a hell of a lot better than he was back in 2017. What I would also say is I am a firm believer in following the money. I'm just a firm believer in it. I just think that ultimately, people that have a lot of money tend to have a lot of money because they're smart. Either they've been smart enough to earn a lot of money, or when they've acquired a lot of money, they've been smart enough to keep it. Generally speaking, if you've got a lot of money, you're probably pretty smart. Like Kevin Hart says, he looks at life like a game where the points at the end of the day are money. Life is a game, right? And so if you rack up a lot of money, you score a lot of points in that game, that's a measure of success. Successful people tend to make smart decisions and put their money in strong positions. When we look at Azaitar, he's only 13-0. He hasn't really beaten anyone. He hasn't really fought in any promotions or any decent promotions. The only notable promotion he's really fought in is Brave CF, but I don't think Brave CF are going to be paying this guy that much money. Having said that, this guy is dressed head to toe in Gucci. He's sat on G-Wagons. He's hanging out with Ali Abdelaziz. Here he is, head to toe in Gucci. He's on a private jet. He's got a Ferrari here. He's wearing a pair of Yeezys. This pair of Yeezys is worth like $800 if he bought them on resale market. And he's hanging out with guys like Khabib. He trains with Nasrat Haqparast. Someone's bankrolling this guy. Someone is putting a lot of money and believes that this guy is very good. So we don't know how good he is because there's not enough footage to kind of show us how good he is. But someone with big bags of cash is very high on this dude. And what I've learned over the years is don't bet against money, because money makes smart decisions. So someone with a lot of cash has a lot of belief in Ottman Azaitar, and for that reason, I wouldn't doubt this guy. What I've also noticed is he trains with very, very, very good guys. Here we can see him with Aaron Pico, Ismail Nordiev. You can see Nasrat Haqparast in here, his brother Abu Azaitar. There's a picture of him. Is it this one with Faraz Sahabi training him? So he has very, very high-level training partners. He's managed by one of the best, most successful managers in the game, Ali Abdelaziz, and someone with deep pockets is supporting this guy financially. So all I would say is for anyone, looking to fade Azaitar this weekend, just take this guy seriously because I think he could be pretty good. When I show you this fight, though, you'll understand why, from a betting point of view, this one's tricky. So what I can tell you about Azaitar is in his last two fights against Karma Worthy and also Timu Packalin, his boxing has looked absolutely brilliant. Please don't judge his boxing on this performance because remember what I said, his striking has improved exponentially from this performance back in 2017 to what we're getting from him in 2020. What we see from Azaitar in 2020 is very, very fluid boxing, good defense, great combinations, throws a high volume of strikes, he moves very well, he's a total package, and he's got big power in his hands. He's also got the killer instinct. When he has his opponent hurt, he doesn't give them any time to recover. He swarms them and he goes in for the kill. He doesn't let them off the hook. That's notable here because Matt Frevola has pretty poor striking defense and he tends to eat a lot of big shots. We've seen Frevola rocked multiple times in his fight against Luis Pena, multiple times in his fight against Lando Venata, but both guys kind of let him off the hook and recover. If Azaitar hurts this guy with his boxing, I don't think he's going to give Frevola any chance to recover. So Frevola's got to fight a perfect fight. He can't afford to eat big shots from Azaitar. If he does, if he gets hurt, if he gets wobbled, he's not going to be able to rely on his toughness to recover like he did against Pena or Venata. Azaitar is the kind of dude that will put him away. But we know that Matt Frevola has bad striking defense because he's not a striker. His bread and butter is his grappling. He's a hard-nosed, blue-collar, hard-working grappler. He's a wrestler, and that's where this fight gets interesting because Azaitar's takedown defense isn't great. We can see here Alejandro Pato getting in on a nice deep double leg, connecting his hands around Azaitar's legs and yanking him to the ground. Now this isn't that bad of a position for Azaitar to find himself in because his opponent's dragged him to the ground, but his opponent doesn't have a lot here. He's got his hands connected around Azaitar's legs, but he doesn't really have a tight grip. Azaitar's in a strong position to work his way back up to his feet here because he's very, very close to the cage. He can keep his back tight to the cage, slowly slip his legs out from underneath his opponent. You can see there his opponent doesn't have tight control of these legs. Slip those legs out and start the wall walk back to your feet. What happens next is a little bit concerning for me, and one of the reasons why I think it's very dangerous to bet Azaitar this weekend, because he may have improved over the last 3 years, but we don't have the footage to know either way. So take a look at what happens next. So Azaitar's doing the correct thing here. He's got his back tight to the cage, which means his back is protected. His opponent can't get to the back and try to take his back and fish for a rear naked choke. And in order to flatten Azaitar out, his opponent's got to commit a decent amount of energy to yank him off the cage. This isn't a bad position for Azaitar to find himself in, because his opponent no longer even has his hands connected around his waist, and he doesn't have control of his legs either. What Azaitar needs to do in this position is push down on the shoulder of his opponent and explode back up to his feet, but he doesn't. He doesn't do that. He kind of hesitates. You see him go to post there. His opponent drags his wrist out from underneath him. See his opponent there dragging his wrist out from underneath him. And what happens next is even more concerning. You've got to protect your back in this position. The cage is a great weapon to defend yourself against the back take, because so long as Azaitar keeps his back tight to this cage, his opponent cannot work to take the back. Watch what happens. Azaitar gets really complacent in this position, takes his own back off the cage, and enables his opponent to slip this hook in on the left side. So Azaitar's gone from a position where his opponent can't get to the back to basically gift wrapping his back and giving it to his opponent, where he now is forced to have to defend a rear naked choke. But even though he's put himself in a worse position, he's not in the ultimate bad position yet, because his opponent doesn't have full back control. He's only got one hook in on the left side. See the position of his opponent's right foot. He doesn't have two hooks in yet, which means he doesn't have full back control. Azaitar can defend himself from having his back fully taken by keeping the right side of his body tight to the cage. Again, using the cage as a weapon to defend himself in this position. Remember what we said, keeping the back tight to the cage. He's lost that now, but he can protect his back from being fully taken if he keeps his right side tight to the cage. So there's not enough space between his right side and the cage for Pato to slip his right leg in and get a second hook in. But look what happens. Again, gets super complacent here and gives his opponent the space to slip that second hook in on the right side. It's unforgivable to me, and it just shows bad takedown defense, a low-level ground game, and a lack of awareness as to how to use the cage to defend yourself when you're on the ground. Throughout this fight, Azaitar demonstrates really, really low-level ground skills. So when I look at this matchup between Frevola and Azaitar, this is just not a fight that I want to bet, because on one hand, I'm looking at this and I'm going, you know what? The fighter that I'm seeing in 2020 against Karma Worthy is unrecognizable to this guy. His boxing, his movement, it looks so much better than it did in this matchup. But we don't know if his grappling has improved at the same rate, because we don't have any evidence of it. And if Azaitar comes in to this fight against Frevola with, really low-level ground skills like that, questionable takedown defense, Frevola can cause him big trouble, because Frevola is a reasonably skilled grappler, reasonably strong wrestler. But on the other hand, you don't want to be betting Frevola, because if Azaitar has improved his takedown defense at an equal rate to his striking, it's very, very likely he can keep this fight standing and cause Frevola huge problems, because Frevola is a low-level striker that's very bad defensively. On top of that, when you look at a guy like Frevola, he is quite undersized. He's not that much, he's about the same size as Azaitar. He's 5'9" with a 71-inch reach. We can see here, Azaitar's 5'8" with a 71-inch reach. So both guys are roughly around the same size, but Frevola just doesn't have a very physically imposing ground game. He's not the strongest grappler, so when he does take you down, it's not like having someone really heavy on top of you. He does struggle to kind of rack up a lot of control time on guys. So for me, it's not really a fight that I want to bet. I don't think we know about Azaitar. I don't think we know enough about Azaitar to feel comfortable betting him. But it's promising, man. He does look pretty good from what I've seen. Into the next fight, we're going to be talking about Joanne Calderwood against Jessica Evil Eye. She is rocking the nickname Jessica Evil Eye. We love it. Okay, so if we look at the odds on this fight, we have got both girls at around even money, with Joanne Calderwood the favourite. I do think that is a little bit off. When I was researching this fight, I definitely lean towards Jessica Ai here. And the main reason is both these girls are primarily strikers, but Jessica Ai has a base in boxing. Joanne Calderwood has a base in kicking. And whenever you've got a boxer versus a kicker, as a general rule, there will always be exceptions to every rule, but as a general rule, the boxer will have an advantage over the kickboxer in that kind of striking dynamic, because it's a lot easier to punch someone in the face than kick someone in the head. And if you just remember that, anytime you get a boxer against a kicker, the boxer usually has the advantage. If you spend a little bit of time watching striking footage on both these guys, you'll see that Jessica Ai is much better defensively. She's a much better boxer than Joanne Calderwood, and on the whole, she's got a lot more tools, a lot more ways to win this fight. Joanne Calderwood has very, very bad boxing defense. She'll quite often try to counter boxing combinations with kicks. And you know what they say, the best counter to a leg kick is a punch in the face. And that means that, Calderwood quite often takes a lot of damage in her fights because her boxing just isn't great. One of the downsides to Calderwood as well is that she doesn't wear damage very well. She jokes herself that every single fight she gets in, she gets a bloody nose. But she also gets cut quite easily and doesn't wear damage anywhere near as well as Jessica Ai. So, that's a big deal. If you get a fight where, the rounds are really competitive, they're really close, it's hard to kind of gauge who won. But you've got, Calderwood busted up really badly, Jessica Ai not really showing too much signs of visible damage, that can sway the judges. So that's one kind of factor. It's making me kind of lean towards Jessica Ai as well. Another area where Jessica Ai will have an advantage in this fight is on the ground. There's absolutely no question that Jessica Ai is a significantly better grappler than Joanne Calderwood. Joanne Calderwood has very bad takedown defense, and she's extremely weak off her back. Calderwood's also trying to reinvent herself a little bit over the last 2 years, where if you go back and watch her fights dating back to 2018, you'll notice that Calderwood is now starting to incorporate more and more grappling into her game plans and strategies. So you'll notice her, shoot takedowns towards the end of rounds to try and steal rounds. You'll see her try and mix things up a lot more with her grappling than she did before. Unfortunately, even though she's got, pretty good offensive wrestling, she just doesn't have the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to back things up. So what you quite often find with Calderwood is she'll take these girls down, but then because she doesn't have the technical ability to back up that wrestling, she gets herself into trouble on the ground. And Jessica Ai is a far better grappler than her. So if this fight does go to the ground, that's just another area where Jessica Ai has an advantage. I'd even go as far as saying that Jessica Ai is better than Calderwood in every single aspect of MMA. So now, based on what I've just said, you're probably thinking, well, let's all run out and bet Jessica Ai then. And it is very tempting. I'm not going to lie to you guys. It is super tempting to go bet Jessica Ai here. I haven't personally bet on her yet. I'm still thinking about it. But the thing that makes me very, very apprehensive about Jessica Ai is that she's very inconsistent. If you look at her record, she's got a pro MMA record of 15-8. And, she's been involved in split decisions, lots of split decisions, lots of close fights. And my biggest criticism of Jessica Ai is that she just doesn't do enough to put her stamp on rounds. She is one of these fighters that makes really poor decisions in fights at the wrong times. From a technical point of view, she's, I would say from a technical point of view, when you consider everything that she can actually do, she's one of the best flyweights in the division. But her fight IQ and decision making and the strategic side of the fight, really lets her down to the point where she is the exact kind of fighter that will, slightly get an edge on, the striking, in a round, and then a minute to go in the round, give up a weak takedown and let the round slip away. She is the kind of fighter that will beat the brakes off her opponent for 3 minutes of a round, but then take the final 2 minutes off and let her opponent gain the edge in the final 2 minutes of a round, when we know for a fact Jessica Ai's got great cardio, so there's no need to do that. And we also know judges tend to favour the action at the end of the round more than the action at the beginning of the round, which, often costs her rounds. She's just not a very streetwise fighter. Her fight IQ is just not there, and that's why her record is so choppy. That's why she's lost so many fights that she should have won. And that bothers me a little bit with this one. I never really liked to bet on fighters with bad fight IQ. So when I look at this matchup, there's no doubt that Jessica Ai has the advantage pretty much everywhere. But can I trust her to show up and perform? That's the difficult thing for me. It's a shame because she's a great fighter. And this is a great matchup for her. But I just don't trust her. When I look at fighters like Jessica Ai, I very rarely bet them unless they're underdogs. Because I'm always looking at the risk to reward ratios, so I want to get a good deal for my money. I want to put my money in a strong position. If I know someone like Jessica Ai, sometimes shows up and performs well, and sometimes she doesn't. If I'm looking at a fighter like Jessica Ai who's very inconsistent, the way I look at it is there's a 50% chance she may show up and perform well. There's a 50% chance she may not show up and perform well. And so I never like to take a fighter like Jessica Ai at an implied probability of less than 50% because I need some insurance that, if she doesn't perform, over the long term I'm getting a good deal. Her current odds are around 2.0, which is plus 100, give her an implied probability of 50%, which means to get any value here, you've got to give her a better than 50% chance of winning. And how can I do that when sometimes she shows up and performs well and sometimes she doesn't? So it's a real difficult one for me, and a situation where you need a lot of discipline on bets like this, because when you study it, when you do the research, everything points towards Jessica Ai winning this fight. But when you actually consider the fact that she may just turn up and not fight very well, she may make poor decisions in the fight, which gifts rounds to Calderwood, she becomes a lot less attractive. So I haven't made my mind up on this one yet. Do your own research on it. And I don't know, boys. I don't know. It's a very good stylistic fight. A very good stylistic matchup for Ai, but you know what they say, or you know what George St. Pierre said. He said, fighting is like 90% mental, and that's the side of things that I really feel lets Jessica Ai down. She's got the skills, but she doesn't have the fight IQ to back it up. Hope you found that useful. So we now go into the co-main event of the evening. Iron Michael Chandler against Dan the Hangman Hooker. Now, before I really get deep into this one, I am going to let Mr. Hooker basically summarize how I'm feeling about this one, and then I'll kind of explain why I'm feeling like this one. So this was a question that he took at today's press conference. So listen to the question and listen to Hooker's answer.
And for Dan, do you believe your style is the worst matchup Chandler could be facing on his debut?
It's not a good style. I bet if he could have picked anyone else, it wouldn't have been me. Long, tall guy. My game's built around defending wrestlers. The only reason I'm here is because everyone ahead of me turned the fight down. They don't want to take the risk. They don't want to risk their spot. They come up with a bunch of excuses.
So that's basically all I wanted to show you. It's not a lot, but it is very, very interesting how Dan Hooker's kind of identified that he is the worst stylistic matchup for Michael Chandler in the top 10 of the UFC's lightweight division. And I agree with him. I think based on Chandler's past performances, Hooker is a crazy difficult matchup for Chandler. And so for that reason, I'm going to be betting Dan Hooker this weekend. I think he's a great deal. When you take a look at the current odds, we've got Hooker at around even money. So we've got Hooker at average odds of about 1.77, which makes it minus 130 for an implied probability of 57%. This is a really good stylistic matchup for Dan Hooker because a lot of Dan Hooker's strengths play into Michael Chandler's weaknesses. So where should we start with this one? First of all, let's kick things off with... Where do I want to start with this one? Because there is a lot to unpack. Maybe we should go Hooker strength and Chandler's weakness, how they kind of link in like that, because I want to show you some footage as well. Okay, so first of all, X factors. Michael Chandler, won the Bellator title at a very young age. Spent, the rest of his career competing in Bellator, and he's now coming over to the UFC at the age of 34 years old. So I don't want to be the guy that accuses Michael Chandler of anything. I'm sure that he has fought clean his whole career. There's no reason to doubt Michael Chandler as an athlete, as a man, or anything that he's achieved. I think he's a brilliant fighter. However, there is basically no drug testing in Bellator at all. It's complete bandit country. He can do whatever he wants, which means he can use an IV to rehydrate after weigh-ins. He can take whatever supplements he wants without worrying about tainted supplements. This guy can do whatever he wants. Now he's in the UFC under strict USADA drug testing. There may be a lot of things that he can't do for this fight that he has done for a very long time in the past. That might have an influence on his performance. What we do know is, in recent history, there has been a guy called Will Brooks that came into the UFC. You'll see here that Michael Chandler actually lost to Will Brooks. Will Brooks beat the actual brakes off Chandler, especially in this rematch. And Will Brooks was an incredible fighter. Will Brooks looked like he could even have been the best lightweight in the world when the UFC signed him. And when he came to the UFC, he was a shadow of himself. He wasn't the same guy. And now many of you who have only come into watching MMA in the last few years probably don't even know who Will Brooks is. Well, Will Brooks was a beast. He was a Bellator lightweight champion, and he beat the brakes off Michael Chandler, and he wasn't the same when he came to the UFC. Octagon jitters are a big deal. I know fighting in Bellator is a big deal, but, the UFC is something different, and who knows how much these X factors are going to weigh on Michael Chandler's performance this weekend. Now, we know that Michael Chandler is a very strong wrestler. He's got a background in NCAA Division 1, and the guy is an absolute beast on the ground. There's absolutely no doubt about it. There's no real evidence of Dan Hooker's takedown defense, so that's the first huge risk factor for betting Dan Hooker here, and it's also, Chandler's clearest path to victory. I honestly think if this fight stays standing, Chandler's completely screwed for reasons I'll show you with some footage in a minute. But Chandler's going to need to get to his wrestling in order to win this fight. Now remember what Hooker said in that interview that I just played for you. Hooker said that he is the most difficult style for Chandler because his entire game is built around beating wrestlers. If you think about where Hooker trains, City Kickboxing, you've got Brad Riddell, Kai Kara-France, Israel Adesanya, all difficult. They're not necessarily difficult to take down, but they're very difficult to hold down. You take Kai Kara-France down, what does he do? Pop back up like a spring. Same with Riddell, same with Adesanya, and the same with Hooker every time we've seen him taken down. That's pretty major to me, because not only are these guys at City Kickboxing incredibly good at working their way back up to their feet, but there's also a huge size difference here. Dan Hooker's 6 foot tall with a 75-inch reach. Michael Chandler is 5'8" with a 69-inch reach. What you will quite often find in MMA is when small guys try to take bigger guys down, they can hit the takedown no problem, but they struggle to hold them down because the bigger guy has got nice long limbs and they're so much more physically imposing that they can often just stand back up. This is why when we were talking about Matt Frevola a few moments ago, we were saying Frevola often struggles to hold guys down because he's very, very small for a lightweight. And I think Chandler has the same problem. We've seen him have the same problem in Bellator, and I think he's definitely going to have the same problem with Hooker. The problem is we haven't seen Hooker fight any strong wrestlers. If we go back throughout his UFC career, Ian Entwistle's a BJJ guy, Blanco's a bit of everything, Hioki's a kickboxer, Rodriguez kickboxer, Adiva Muay Thai guy, Jason Knight kind of like kickboxing BJJ guy, Pearson boxer, Diakaze kickboxer. Miller is actually one of the guys that did take Hooker down, but he immediately popped back to up to his feet. Miller, of course, primarily a BJJ guy, but reasonably good everywhere. Burns, BJJ guy, reasonably good everywhere. He tried to take Hooker down, he couldn't. Barboza kickboxer, Vic boxer, Iaquinta, bit of everything. He tried to take Hooker down, he couldn't. Felder kickboxer, Poirier, bit of everything. Did take Hooker down, but it was when Hooker was very, very tired and very, very badly hurt late on in the fight. So we haven't really seen Hooker fight any high-level wrestlers. But from what I've seen, he's shown great flashes of takedown defense. When guys shoot in on Hooker, he immediately looks to clear his legs and get his back over to the cage. And when he does get his back to the cage, he immediately starts fighting for underhooks. If you do take him down, straight away he's looking to clear his legs, post on the canvas, and pop back up. Hooker looks like a very difficult guy to take down and control. Now, if Michael Chandler was the kind of guy, you know, with an NCAA Division 1 level background that could come in here on Saturday night and relentlessly spam takedowns over and over and over again, like a Colby Covington or, you know, like a Frankie Edgar or a Gregor Gillespie, if Chandler was that kind of wrestler, there is no way that I would be betting Dan Hooker this weekend. Not a fucking chance. Because I do think the one style that could cause Hooker big problems would be that kind of relentless wrestler that can just keep coming forward, keep shooting, and keep putting Hooker on the ground. But if you know anything about Michael Chandler at all, if you've followed his career, if you've watched his past fights, you'll know that almost all of Michael Chandler's fights have been stand-up fights. Very, very few of them go to the ground. And that's because when Michael Chandler does use a lot of grappling in his fights, he tends to slow down quite quickly. And so Chandler's way of, you know, combating that is to keep fights standing so that he doesn't burn himself out with his grappling. So that puts him in a difficult position here, because if he stands and strikes with Hooker, he's probably going to be in a lot of trouble. But if he uses the one skill that he's got, which could cause Hooker a problem, he risks burning himself out. So that makes this a very, very interesting fight for me, because I do think this is a real difficult stylistic matchup for Chandler, and I completely agree with what Hooker said in today's press conference. You know, it's a tough one, and I feel like the UFC are kind of throwing Chandler to the wolves here by giving him the most difficult stylistic matchup possible, because I know we've seen Hooker slow down in 5-round fights against Poirier and Felder, but it's very important to remember that he only slowed down towards the end of the 3rd round. You know, his gas tank for a 3-round fight is very, very good. And on top of that, the pace that was set in those Poirier and Felder fights was unbelievable. Those guys went to war for 25 minutes. If this fight has that kind of pace, based on what I've seen, there's no way that Chandler is going to be able to keep up with Hooker's output. He just doesn't have the gas tank for it. I'm not saying Chandler has a bad gas tank. I'm just saying he gets flatter and flatter as the rounds wear on. You know, by midway point of the 2nd round, if this pace equals, you know, the first couple of rounds of the Felder fight or the first couple of rounds of the Poirier fight, Chandler's going to be in a hell of a lot of trouble. So we've spoken in this video about how, you know, I'm saying Hooker has a big advantage standing. And the annoying thing for me is I'm going to show you some footage to try and illustrate this, but it's going to be difficult because I can't show you all the footage that I want to, because some of the matchups I want to show you are copyrighted on the Bellator website, and some of them are copyrighted on UFC Fight Pass, right? I can't show you any footage from Hooker to show you how he's going to be able to exploit these weaknesses in Chandler's skill set that I'm about to show you. But if you are thinking of betting this fight, if you're on the fence about Hooker, you know, I'm not your fucking guru. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I don't care what you do. I am just telling you that if you've got an hour or two spare and you're interested in betting this fight, go do your own research on this one, because I feel there's a little bit of gold in Hooker. I'm not saying he's definitely going to win. There's risk with every bet. You know, for all we know, Chandler could have had the best training camp of his life, come in with an amazing gas tank, spam takedowns for 15 minutes and cause Hooker big trouble. All we can do is make the best decision possible with the information we've got available, and based on past fights, I think Hooker gives Chandler hell. But let me know in the comments below how you feel about this one, boys. I could be completely wrong. Anyway, why does Hooker have such a big advantage standing? Well, let me show you. If we take a look at Chandler's style of striking, you can see he's very heavy on the lead leg. That gives Hooker a big path to victory, because we know one of Hooker's best weapons is the leg kick. After Edson Barboza devastated him with leg kicks, he went and learned how to throw his own leg kicks, and now we've seen him cause both Paul Felder and Dustin Poirier big problems with the leg kicks. So as we're watching footage of Michael Chandler, pay attention to how he creates a really wide sideways stance, and he's very, very heavy on the lead leg. And even though when guys come forward, you'll kind of see him spring back to evade the strike, just remember that Chandler's 5'8", Dan Hooker's 6 foot tall. So Chandler has to cover a lot of distance to get inside boxing range and land his power right hand. And before he even gets anywhere near into a range where he can land that big right hand, Hooker's going to be able to hammer that outside leg with a leg kick. You know, if we look at the size difference, again, I want to reiterate, Michael Chandler only has a 69-inch reach. Hooker has a 75.5-inch reach. That 6-inch reach advantage is huge in this fight, especially for someone with nice long legs like Hooker that can inflict significant damage with leg kicks. So just pay attention to how heavy on the lead leg you see Chandler stand. But Chandler has this style of striking where he will basically blitz in and out. But the problem with Chandler's style of striking is this. You kind of see it there. Let me just go back here. You kind of see it here, right? Where we go. Chandler does this thing over and over and over and over and over again. And what's really annoying is I've researched the balls off this fight, and Chandler has been rocked, dropped, wobbled, and knocked out in so many of the past fights that I've seen him in. But I can't show you much evidence of that because the fights where it happens are locked down by copyright. But the weakness that I'm going to show you in this matchup and the one against Benson Henderson are going to highlight this weakness that he has. It's just that the Brandon Gertz and Benson Henderson weren't able to make him pay. So watch this. You will see him spring into boxing range. He'll do it here. There. He'll spring into boxing range. But he will just be a sitting duck is basically the point I'm trying to make. You can see here, his hands are down low, his chin up is high and exposed, and his legs are in a really awkward position. Every time he comes forward, he leaves himself vulnerable to huge counters. He just pays absolutely no attention to what his opponent may do to react to him coming forward. Remember a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about the Alicio De Chirico versus Jacqueline Buckley fight, we were saying Buckley does exactly the same thing. He comes forward in a straight line, winging these big hooks, but he doesn't move his head, and he doesn't even consider what his opponent might do to counteract what he's trying to do. And that just makes these guys super vulnerable to big counters. Now, if you go back and you watch Dan Hooker's fight against Gilbert Burns, Jim Miller in particular, Ross Pearson, you will see that Dan Hooker has laser focus and he's very, very reactive to what his opponent is doing. He's very, very good at reading what they're going to do and punishing them for any slight little mistake they make. In the case of Jim Miller, Ross Pearson, Gilbert Burns, Miller and Pearson made one tiny little split-second mistake, and Hooker delivered fight-ending, devastating strikes to literally send him on a one-way ticket to the Shadow Realm. He's got devastating knockout counters, and so every single time Chandler comes forward and attacks Hooker in this way, he's at significant risk of being knocked out. And I will show you countless examples of him making this mistake against Gertz and Henderson. And it ain't just Gertz and Henderson, he does it against all of his opponents, and he does it over and over and over and over again. It doesn't matter if he gets wobbled in a fight. He won't learn his lesson. He'll continue to do it in that fight. He doesn't learn. He doesn't make that adjustment. I'm not saying he won't make that adjustment for this weekend, but he does it over and over again. So let me show you. So there, he's done it there. Just these tiny little moments. But you'll see, heavy on the lead leg. Watch. Heavy on the lead leg. Look how heavy he is on that lead leg. Remember, he's fighting someone that's 6 foot tall. He's going to be able to hammer that lead leg from a range where Chandler won't be able to counter him. Now look there. What's this? What's going on there, boys? What's going on there? Watch this. Watch this. Watch. What's going on here? What is going on here? What's Chandler doing? Chin up high and exposed. Hands just flailing out in front of him. Legs in an awkward position. How often have we seen Hooker throw devastating counter knees right up the middle? And he's the perfect height for him at 5'8". Look at this low stance. As Chandler ducks down with his eyes closed, he's going to be wide open to that counter knee from Hooker. And just look at how unaware he is in this position. What's this? Perfect placement for one of Hooker's knees. Completely oblivious to anything that Gertz may be able to do to him. And it just happens over and over again. Look at him here. Hands down low, chin up high, legs in an awkward position. I don't know how many examples you want me to show of you. We've only watched 20 seconds of footage. I've shown you 3. He does it over and over and over again. He did it again there. Could have put his head right into a head kick. Now, I know that obviously Gertz is southpaw, and Chandler is orthodox, so that adds additional risk, you know, with the way these guys are in the open striking stance. But just look, just poor striking defense. Chandler tries to alleviate the pressure with a takedown. He doesn't get it. But this is a weakness that you see over and over and over again. Over again. Over and over again. Just very, very reckless when he comes inside. For whatever reason, he feels the need to duck his head down a lot. And that's a big mistake against someone like Hooker that's looking to fire back with hard straight punches, big knees down the middle, devastating counter elbows. You know, look at this. Look at this. What are you doing? What are you doing? Hands down low, chin up high, overexposing himself. And ends up shooting up a takedown midway through. But anyway, boys, that's just one fight. Let me now show you Chandler doing it against another opponent, Benson Smooth Henderson. Now, we know Benson Henderson doesn't have much power in his hands. Benson Henderson's never really been that dangerous striking. But Chandler continues to make that same mistake over and over again in this fight, where he overcommits and leaves himself wide open to the knockout kill shot. It's a little bit of a slow start here, but you will see in a moment, you know, this weakness present itself again. Kind of see little mistakes there where he's kind of overcommitting, then turning his back. But it's still a feeling out process here. You kind of see it there, but you didn't get it from the best camera angle when, again, he's coming forward swinging for the fences, but he's not really moving his head, and he's not really paying too much attention to what Henderson is doing. You kind of see it there, right? He just overcommits to the right hand a lot. You know, overcommits to the right hand. You've got to remember, overcommitting to the right hand in this way against guys like Brandon Gertz, guys like Benson Henderson, who are like 5'9", 5'10" tall. He's going to be throwing the big right hand like this at a guy like Hooker, who's 6 foot tall, with pinpoint accurate counters. Just very, very reckless. Very, very, very reckless. Does it again. Overcommits, chin up high and exposed, hands down low. And you can even see he's off balance as he retracts that left hand. Just poor striking defense. So when he's going up against a sniper like Hooker, I think he's really going to struggle a lot. You know, he needs to get this fight to the ground. He needs to use a lot of wrestling, because if it stays standing, he's in big trouble. And he's got to cover so much distance with that power right hand to get inside Hooker's reach. It's just a bad fight for him if Hooker can keep it standing, which I think he can. And again, look at how heavy he's standing on this lead leg. Very, very heavy on the lead leg. But anyway, I've probably shown you enough. I've probably made my point, right? And Chandler gets the knockout. But anyway, these kind of mistakes that you make, they're not going to cost you against lower level opponents in Bellator. You know, the kind of guys Chandler's been fighting over the last few years, like an almost 40-year-old Benson Henderson, Brandon Gertz, Brent Primus. You know, these guys are not going to be able to punish you for those mistakes. But when you start to face higher level opponents, they will punish you for those mistakes. That's exactly what happened against Pitbull. Take a look at this. This fight lasts less than a minute, but take a look. Again, we know Chandler's very reckless, right? Watch this. You can't make mistakes like this at the highest level of MMA. So look at that, right? Watch this. Chandler, same as always, comes forward recklessly, hands down low, chin up high and exposed. And Pitbull tried to counter him with a right hand, but he missed. Didn't quite land on his target, right? Chandler comes forward recklessly like he always does, throwing that right hand. Or he actually steps in with a jab, but comes forward recklessly like he always does. And Pitbull plants his feet and tries to fire back with a counter, and it misses. But Pitbull's downloaded that information. He's kind of figured out the way that Chandler moves, how much distance he's going to cover when he comes forward like that, where his head's going to be. And Pitbull is obviously trying to get reads so that, you know, next time Chandler comes forward, he's going to get closer and closer and closer to landing the kill shot. Watch what happens next time Chandler overcommits and comes forward. Chandler comes forward and Pitbull lands the exact same strike he tried to counter him with 20 seconds previously. Take a look at this. Take a look at this. Look at what Pitbull does. Chandler comes forward and Pitbull tries to catch him with the counter right hand behind the ear and just misses. 20 seconds later, watch Pitbull's right hand. 20 seconds later. He's just waiting. Pitbull's just waiting. He's waiting for Chandler to come forward again. Bang, throws the exact same strike. It's a different camera angle, but both guys have done exactly the same thing. Chandler's stepped forward with that jab, and Pitbull's come over the top and caught him behind the ear. Except this time he's landed clean, and he's knocked Chandler out. Like I say, you can make mistakes. You can make those reckless mistakes where you come in and out of your opponent's range. You can make them all day against lower level MMA. You know, guys like Brent Primus, you know, guys like Sydney Outlaw. But when you face that step up in competition, you will get punished for making mistakes like that. And Hooker is very, very good at capitalizing on tiny little windows of opportunity to deliver fight-ending strikes to his opponent. Go watch his fight against Gilbert Burns, Jim Miller, Ross Pearson, James Vick. He's extremely dangerous, and that is why I'm going to be betting Hooker this weekend. It's not a super confident bet because we haven't seen Hooker fight any high-level wrestlers, but from what we have seen, Hooker's pretty difficult to take down, pretty difficult to hold down, and Chandler just doesn't use his wrestling that often because when he does, he burns himself out. Anyway, boys, we went into quite a lot of depth there, a little bit more depth than I would usually go in, and so leave a comment below. Let me know what you think. But we now move on to the main event, the big one. Dustin Poirier against Conor McGregor. Great to see Conor back in the UFC after a year layoff, and he looks phenomenal. He looks absolutely amazing. I think when you look at this fight from a stylistic point of view, very, very difficult for Poirier. There's no doubt about it. If we look at the odds, Conor's one of the biggest favourites on the card. Currently around about average odds of 1.33, which is minus 303 for an implied probability of 75%. If we take a look at the odds on Dustin Poirier, he's currently around about an average of 3.45, which is plus 245 for an implied probability of 29%. So when I look at this fight, I think I've got to break it into two separate categories. We've got to focus on the skills of both guys, and then we've got to focus on everything else. I really, really hate cancel culture, and I hate negative people. I hate trolling, and I definitely don't want to talk about the negative aspects of Conor's life that he's been through over the last few years. Because when you watch him on Embedded, you see him with his family, you see him in interviews, he seems to be really trying hard to turn his life around. And I love this new version of Conor. You know, the way he came across at today's press conference was brilliant. He's so mature, he's so grown up, he's such a likable guy, he's always got good energy about him. And, you know, there's a real authenticity to him where I really feel like he's a good dude. So I don't want to talk about the stuff that I'm about to talk about, but it is something that I feel is a significant factor in trying to work out the probabilities that both these guys have got of winning. So if we look back through combat sports history, a lot of the time we see, you know, young, hungry, talented fighters, you know, go on a real big upward trajectory in the sport, achieve a lot, reach godlike status, make hundreds of millions of dollars, and then the wheels come off, they go bankrupt, they end up with loads of, you know, legal issues, and they're never the same again. You know, combat sports history, you go back as far as you want, but Conor McGregor is a bit of a sad story up until this point, where eventually the success and fame gets to a fighter, and that then has a massive influence on their performance in either the boxing ring or the cage. You know, you look at John Jones, for an example, probably the best example and maybe only example we've got in MMA, but the John Jones that fought over in St. Preux after that incident with, the pregnant lady, that version of John Jones that fought over in St. Preux, it's not the version of it's not the version of John Jones that was fighting, Glover Teixeira, Vitor Belfort, Shogun. It's just not the same guy. Lost that fire. When you look at Conor, everything he's been through, multiple sexual assault allegations. He had that incident in Miami where he smashed a guy's phone up. The horrible incident in the bar in Dublin. It's quite clear that McGregor's been very distracted, and he's been quite open about this. He said he didn't take many of his past fights that seriously. He wants a rematch with Khabib because he said he didn't train very hard for that fight. He's got multiple business interests, August McGregor suits, proper 12 whiskey. He's got a lot of distractions outside of fighting right now. This wasn't the young, hungry 21-year-old, in Cage Warriors whose dream was to fight in the UFC and dreamed to change, his girlfriend Dee's life and his parents' life. This is not the same guy. And so we know that he's not the same guy in terms of his life and his personality. How much is that taken out of his athletic performance and his ability to perform at the level that made him great? Because, the first time he fought Dustin Poirier, he was on that meteoric rise. He was unstoppable. And a large part of that was because of the hunger that he had. He doesn't have that same hunger. He can say he does, but when you see him in the press conference, he's a very different man now. And it goes back to what Marvin Hagler said, right? It's tough to get out of bed to do road work at 5 a.m. when you've been sleeping in silk pajamas. It's a tough one for me with McGregor because he looks in absolutely phenomenal shape. As always, he's saying all the right things. And, many people have doubted him many times in his life and many times in his career. And he's very, very good at proving people wrong. What I would say is, history has a nasty habit of repeating itself. And there have been so many occasions throughout combat sports history where fighters have gone off the rails, tried to make a comeback, and they failed. Maybe Conor McGregor is a unicorn, and many people will point towards his fight last January against Donald Cerrone and say, well, he looked fine against Donald Cerrone. But from my perspective, what does a fight that only lasts 40, 50 seconds really tell us? It doesn't tell us anything. We didn't learn anything about McGregor in his fight against Cerrone. And so it's really, really difficult for me to gauge where Conor's at this stage in his career because of all the distractions that he's had and all the turmoil in his life and how we know these stories usually end. These stories in combat sport don't usually have a happy ending, at least not for a very long time. I mean, Mike Tyson's now getting his life back on track, but he's had drug problems, he's been to prison, he's had tons of legal issues, he's been bankrupt. I'm not saying Conor's going down that road, but I'm just saying it's something for us to consider. I want to be a believer in Conor. He's one of my favourite fighters ever. He's a big role model. He's got such a great energy. He's an exciting fighter. I think he's a brilliant guy. But if we're looking at this fight and we're trying to identify all risk factors, for me, that is the biggest risk factor. Now, if the version of Conor that has shown up in the past, against guys like Eddie Alvarez or, the second Nate Diaz fight shows up, which were pretty good versions of Conor, what's the probability that Conor's going to win this fight, right? That's the question we've got to ask. Let's assume a good version of Conor shows up. If a good version of Conor shows up, I strongly feel like Dustin Poirier is screwed, to be quite honest with you. I know that there's a big chunk of the MMA community out there that believes that Dustin Poirier is going to use the same strategy, or is going to be able to use the same strategy that Floyd Mayweather's used or Nate Diaz used in that first fight to weather the early storm, drag Conor into the second, third and fourth rounds, and then take over and win the fight late on. I really don't see that happening. And that's why I kind of feel like the odds are where they should be. If you're betting on Conor's career falling off a cliff based on all the stuff that's going on outside of the octagon, in his private life, I'd be really nervous about that, because he looks great, in his training footage, his Instagram pictures. He looks in phenomenal shape, and he's sounding very confident and saying all the right things. So I wouldn't want to make a betting decision based on that. I definitely wouldn't want to make a betting decision on Poirier being able to utilize the same strategy Nate Diaz used to beat Conor, because when you go back and you watch that fight between Conor and Nate, both the first and the second fight, and even the Floyd fight, you'll see that Conor inflicted a massive amount of damage on Nate early. In both fights against Nate, he knocked him down multiple times. And by the beginning of the second round of both fights, Nate looked like he had been attacked by a shark. Like, he was busted up very bad. Conor inflicted a massive amount of damage in that first and second round against Diaz. Conor even landed a couple big shots on Floyd. He got the Floyd. He landed that one big uppercut. Conor is very, very dangerous, especially early. In order to wear Conor down, you've got to be able to take everything that he throws at you. You've got to be able to eat those shots, weather that early storm and take the fight into the third and fourth and fifth round. Nate Diaz didn't beat Conor McGregor because Conor just gassed out. Nate Diaz beat Conor McGregor because he was tough enough to take Conor's best shots and survive. And that's very, very important, because in order for Conor to slow down in this fight, you're going to have to make him work. He didn't slow down against Eddie Alvarez because, right from the first second, Alvarez saw McGregor's movement, he felt his power, and he was put into a defensive shell. Eddie Alvarez couldn't get anything going. He completely allowed McGregor to dictate the pace, control the center of the octagon, and because he allowed Conor to fight in a very comfortable range, because Eddie was in a defensive shell, Conor was able to control his breathing, control his heart rate, control his output, pick his shots, and absolutely cruise. Conor McGregor probably could have fought for 20 rounds like that without slowing down. You're only going to make Conor slow down if you take his shots and are able to come forward and pressure him and make him fight in a range where he can't control things. He can't control his breathing, can't control his heart rate, he can't control his output, because you're coming forward, you're forcing him to exchange, and he has to react to you. When Conor's leading the dance, he's a fucking nightmare. He only struggles when someone else leads the dance and he can't dictate the pace. Unfortunately, there's only two ways to take control from Conor. There's only two ways that he ain't going to lead the dance. You either take him down, or you weather the early storm and start to force him to fight on the back foot, where his arms have started to get tired, and when he's throwing shots, they don't land with as much impact as they used to, so you can start to walk through them. So the real question is, can Dustin do either of those things? He can do both those things, but it's going to be really fucking difficult, and the probability of him doing either of those things is very difficult. Conor's takedown offense isn't great, but it's not terrible either. And Dustin's offensive wrestling isn't great. Dustin is a very high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, but his takedown entries aren't great. He's not the most physically imposing when he's trying to take guys down. Conor did a reasonably good job of keeping the early stages of some of the rounds standing against Khabib. Khabib had a little bit of trouble taking him down initially. And because Dustin's takedown attempts tend to come above hip height, I think Dustin's going to really struggle to get McGregor down. If the fight goes into the third, fourth, and fifth round, absolutely, it'll be a hell of a lot easier for Poirier to get McGregor down. But we're talking about ways Poirier can wear McGregor down. He needs to wear him down early. And in order to do that, one of the ways he can do it anyway is taking Conor down. And early on in the fight, when Conor's still fresh, going to be very, very difficult for Poirier to tie him up and take him down. So the second way that you can wear McGregor down is obviously come forward, take all his best shots, and, basically Homer Simpson the guy, right? Just take all his best shots, weather that early storm, and get to a point where, Conor's tired himself out trying to kill you, and his shots just don't carry as much power in him anymore because his arms have started to get heavy and wear down. What's the probability that Poirier can do that? To be honest with you, I just don't think very high. If we look at the Dan Hooker fight, Hooker hurt him bad and almost knocked him out in round 2. Max Holloway, there were points in this Max Holloway fight where Holloway had him trapped against the cage, was kind of unloading on him. there were moments as well in the Gaethje fight where Poirier was really, really badly hurt. I think there was right towards the end of the third round, Gaethje almost finished Poirier with strikes. Against in the Jim Miller fight, Miller almost stopped him with leg kicks. He got knocked out by Johnson. Joe Duffy boxed his face off, crushed his nose badly. I remember after this fight, Dustin Poirier said his nose was badly broken. He felt like it had broken glass in it. And then McGregor knocked him out. He got wobbled in the Akira Korasani fight, wobbled against Eric Koch. Point I'm trying to make is, Dustin Poirier isn't a Nate Diaz. He's not a guy with an ungodly chin that can just take an insane amount of damage and keep coming forward. Poirier is a guy that we've seen get rocked, dropped, knocked out, wobbled multiple times in his career. And we know that Conor's an absolute sniper. Devastating power in that left hand. Moves extremely well. Superbly accurate. It's a tough one, man. These are two of my favourite fighters. I've loved Dustin Poirier ever since I watched him on the Cage reality TV show a very long time ago, and I love Conor. I'm from Wales. He's Irish. The whole Celtic connection. I love Conor, man. I absolutely love him. It's a great fight. It's a shame one of these guys have got to lose. Before researching this one, I was thinking Poirier might have been a decent underdog bet, but after taking a look at all the footage, it's a tricky one for Poirier. It's a really tough one. But the asterisk next to that is maybe Conor's not the same guy he was in the second fight against Diaz or the fight against Alvarez, because maybe all the stuff going on outside the octagon, all the distractions, will have a big influence on his performance. But we don't know. There's no way to know. Not even Conor knows, but we'll find out on obviously Saturday night. So I hope you enjoyed that breakdown, guys. Let me know if you agree. Let me know if you think I missed anything out. Let me know in the comments below what your bets are for this weekend and how you see these fights going. Also, if you are interested in my opinion on any of the prelim fights on this card, I'll be posting short breakdown videos like these, exactly like these, on my website over the next couple of days. And if you want to research the remaining fights with me, jump on over to Twitch, twitch.tv/Diary of a Pro Gambler. But yeah, check it out. Also, boys, jump on my website, jump in the public chat room, talk about the fights with me on Saturday night while they're happening. I'd love to see you in there. But with that, thank you very much for watching. Please hit the like button below and subscribe if you haven't already. And with that, boys, have a nice little break, 2-week little break now without the UFC. And I'll be back very soon for another breakdown video with that card on February the 6th.